Right now, your brain is fully convinced that it sees reality exactly as it is. You trust your eyes, your awareness of space, and your understanding of what's real versus what isn't. You believe you are observing the world in its true form, but according to modern physics, you might actually be stuck inside a highly restricted version of reality. Not because higher dimensions are distant or require exotic technology to reach, but simply because your own mind lacks the ability to perceive them. Your brain evolved to understand 3 dimensions of space: length, width, and height, and that is where your perception hits a wall. A being existing in 4 dimensions could look at you and witness your entire existence from start to finish all at once. Every moment you have ever lived, every choice you will ever make, your birth and your death, all of it would be visible simultaneously in their field of view. To them, you would appear as a long, twisting shape extending through time. They could see the whole thing right now. You cannot see them, but that doesn't mean they couldn't see you. I have spent decades investigating some of the most puzzling problems in theoretical physics: black holes, quantum mechanics, string theory, and the very nature of space-time itself. And one conclusion keeps emerging from the mathematics: reality is not 3-dimensional. It never was. We merely perceive it that way. Our brains have constructed a simplified model of existence, and we mistake that model for the real thing. The question isn't whether higher dimensions exist. The mathematics demands that they do. The real question is why we can't see them, why we are locked into this narrow sliver of reality, and what it means that we might be living inside a dimensional prison we don't even know exists. Let me explain something that will change how you see the world. When you look around right now, you see 3 dimensions: forward and backward, left and right, up and down. You can move through space in any of these directions. You understand depth. You understand volume. You can picture a cube, a sphere, a room. These are the dimensions your brain comprehends. But here's what most people miss. Dimensions aren't just directions in space. They're degrees of freedom, independent ways that something can vary. And there is no physical law that says reality must stop at 3. In the late 1800s, a mathematician named Edwin Abbott wrote a book called Flatland. It's presented as a novel, but it's really a thought experiment about dimensions, and it remains one of the most profound pieces of scientific literature ever written. Abbott imagined a world that exists in only 2 dimensions, a flat plane. On this plane live creatures: circles, triangles, squares. They can move left and right, forward and backward, but they have no concept of up or down. To them, the universe is a flat surface. That's all that exists. Now imagine you are a 3-dimensional being looking down at Flatland. You can see the entire world at once. You can see inside every house, inside every creature. You can see things that are hidden from them. Walls mean nothing to you. They only block movement in 2 dimensions because you exist in a 3rd. If you tried to visit Flatland, you would appear as a cross-section. If you passed your finger through their world, they would see a circle appear out of nowhere, growing, changing shape, then vanishing. They couldn't comprehend what you actually are. They would only perceive the part of you intersecting their dimension. And here's the disturbing part. You could tell them about the 3rd dimension. You could describe up and down, but they couldn't visualize it. Their brains are wired for 2 dimensions. When you say up, they would try to imagine it as some direction within their plane. They would fail, and they would probably think you were speaking nonsense. To them, you would be incomprehensible, not because you are complex, but because you are dimensional. You exist in a way their minds cannot process. Now let me ask you something. How do you know you are not a flatlander? You probably think that's absurd. You can see 3 dimensions. You understand space. You are not limited like those imaginary 2-dimensional creatures. But consider this. A flatlander would think the exact same thing. They believe they see all of reality. They trust their perception completely. They would have no reason to suspect that an entire dimension existed beyond their comprehension, and they would be wrong. So why would you be any different? The mathematics of physics does not stop at 3 dimensions. In fact, the equations that describe reality work perfectly fine in 4 dimensions, or 5, or 10, or 11. There is nothing special about 3. We live in 3 spatial dimensions, not because that's all there is, but because that's all we can perceive. And here's where it gets strange. When physicists started seriously thinking about a fourth spatial dimension, they realized something disturbing. If a four-dimensional being existed, they could do things that would seem impossible to us. They could see inside your body without cutting you open because inside and outside are only separate in 3 dimensions. In 4 dimensions, there is another direction, a direction perpendicular to all 3 of ours. And from that direction, your skin does not enclose anything. They could remove an object from a locked safe without opening it. They could tie a knot in a rope and then untie it without accessing the ends. They could view your memories physically because the structure of your brain would be completely exposed to them in ways you cannot imagine. To a 4-dimensional being, you are inside out, and you would never see them coming. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, like fantasy, like something that belongs in a story, not in physics. But it's not fiction, it's mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care what sounds believable to you. Let me show you why physicists take this seriously. In 1905, Albert Einstein published his theory of special relativity. Buried in that theory was something revolutionary, something that changed how we understand reality itself. Time is a dimension, not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. Time is a 4th dimension that exists in the same geometric sense as length, width, and height. We move through time just like we move through space. We just don't perceive it that way. Einstein's teacher, Hermann Minkowski, made this explicit. He showed that space and time aren't separate things. They are unified into a single structure called space-time. It is a 4-dimensional continuum, 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. When you move through space, you are also moving through space-time. And here's the key insight. From the perspective of space-time itself, your entire life already exists as a 4-dimensional object. Think about that. Every moment you have ever experienced is a slice of a larger structure. Your past isn't gone. Your future isn't yet to come. They are all there laid out in space-time. You are just moving through it, experiencing one slice at a time. This is called the block universe. And it's not some speculative idea. It is a direct consequence of relativity, a consequence that has been tested and confirmed thousands of times. In the block universe, time doesn't flow. We flow through time. Or more accurately, our consciousness moves along our world line, experiencing each moment sequentially, but the moments themselves already exist. They are just as real as the space in front of you and behind you. To a being that could perceive all 4 dimensions at once, your life would look like a static structure, a long, continuous shape stretching from your birth to your death. They would see you as a baby and as an old person simultaneously. They would see every choice you have made and every choice you will make. And here's the terrifying part. If the block universe is real, if your entire timeline already exists, then in a very real sense, you are not free. You are not choosing your future. You are experiencing a path that is already laid out in 4-dimensional space-time. Your sense of free will might be an illusion created by the fact that you can only perceive one moment at a time. Now, you might object. You might say that time isn't really a spatial dimension. You can move back and forth in space, but you can only move forward in time. And you'd be right. Time is different from space. It has a direction, an arrow. We experience entropy increasing, causes preceding effects, the future being uncertain and the past being fixed. But here's the thing, that asymmetry might be a property of consciousness, not of space-time itself. From the equations of physics, time is just another coordinate. The laws of physics work the same forward and backward in time. There is no fundamental distinction. The arrow of time emerges from statistical mechanics, from the fact that we start in a low entropy state after the Big Bang. But the geometry of space-time itself is symmetric. So when I say you cannot perceive the 4th dimension, I am not just talking about some abstract spatial direction. I am talking about time itself. You cannot see your future. You cannot see your past. You can only experience the present moment. You are trapped in a 3-dimensional slice of a 4-dimensional reality, moving through it at 1 second per second, unable to perceive the whole. And if time is the 4th dimension, then the question becomes even stranger. What would the 5th dimension be? This is where physics gets genuinely strange, and where most people's intuition completely breaks down. In 1919, a mathematician named Theodore Kaluza wrote a paper that shocked Einstein. Kaluza showed that if you assume the universe has four spatial dimensions plus time, then electromagnetism and gravity unify. They become different aspects of the same geometric structure. Einstein was fascinated, but there was an obvious problem. We don't see a fourth spatial dimension. So where is it? A few years later, a physicist named Oscar Klein provided an answer. Maybe the extra dimension is curled up, compactified so small that we cannot perceive it. Imagine an ant walking on a tightrope. From far away, the tightrope looks one-dimensional, just a line, but if you zoom in, you see that the surface of the rope is actually two-dimensional. It has length along the rope, and it has a circular dimension around the rope. The ant can move forward along the rope and also walk around the circumference, but if the circumference is tiny, much smaller than the ant might never notice it's there. From the ant's perspective, it lives in a one-dimensional world. The second dimension exists, but it's hidden by its size. Klein proposed that extra dimensions might work the same way. They exist, but they are curled up at incredibly small scales, so small that we would never notice them in everyday life. At first, this seemed like a clever mathematical trick and nothing more. Why would nature hide dimensions like that? It felt arbitrary. And then string theory came along. String theory emerged from an attempt to understand the fundamental building blocks of reality. For decades, physicists had been discovering more and more particles, quarks, leptons, bosons. It felt like every time we built a more powerful accelerator, we found new particles. There was no end in sight. String theory proposed something radical. What if particles aren't fundamental? What if they are actually tiny vibrating strings? Different vibrations produce different particles. An electron is one vibration pattern, a quark is another, a photon is another. It's an elegant idea. But when physicists started working out the mathematics, they discovered something shocking. The equations only work in 10 dimensions. Not 3, not 4, 10, 9 spatial dimensions plus time. That is what the mathematics requires for string theory to be consistent. At first, this seemed like a fatal flaw. We obviously don't live in 10 dimensions, but then physicists remembered Kaluza and Klein. What if 6 of the spatial dimensions are compactified, curled up into tiny shapes at the Planck scale, far too small to observe? That would leave 3 large spatial dimensions that we can perceive, and 6 hidden dimensions that exist at every point in space but are invisible to us. Suddenly, string theory wasn't just possible, it was a prediction that we are surrounded by dimensions we cannot see. These extra dimensions aren't curled up randomly. They form intricate geometric shapes called Calabi-Yau manifolds, 6-dimensional structures with complex topologies. And the specific shape of these manifolds determines the properties of our universe, the masses of particles, the strengths of forces, everything. In other words, the physics we observe is determined by the geometry of dimensions we cannot perceive. We are flatlanders living in 3 dimensions while 6 more exist all around us, hidden in plain sight. Now you might be wondering, if these dimensions are real, why can't we detect them? Why can't we do experiments to prove they exist? The answer is deeply frustrating. They are too small. The Planck length is about 1035 meters, absurdly tiny, 100 billion times smaller than a proton. If an atom were scaled up to the size of the observable universe, the Planck length would be about the width of a tree. We have no technology that can probe scales that small. We might never have such technology. The energies required would be astronomical, far beyond anything we can generate in a particle accelerator. So we are in a strange position. The mathematics of our best theories predicts extra dimensions, but those dimensions are hidden in a way that makes them effectively impossible to observe. It's like being a flatlander who has been told about the third dimension. You can understand the concept, you can work with it mathematically, but you can never see it. You can never access it directly. You have to infer its existence from indirect effects. And there are indirect effects, gravitational anomalies, particle physics puzzles, things that don't quite make sense in 3 dimensions, but would make sense in higher dimensions. These are hints, clues, but not proof. So we are left with a haunting possibility that we live in a 10-dimensional universe, but are perceptually trapped in 3. That 6 dimensions of reality exist at every point in space, closer to you than your own hand, but forever beyond your ability to perceive. You could pass your hand through a higher dimension right now and never know it. Let me tell you about gravity, because gravity is strange. And its strangeness might be telling us something about dimensions. Gravity is by far the weakest force in nature, enormously weaker than electromagnetism or the nuclear forces, so much weaker that it's actually bizarre. Think about it. A tiny fridge magnet can overcome the gravitational pull of the entire Earth. The electromagnetic force in that magnet is stronger than the gravity of a planet with a mass of 6 × 10⁻24 kilograms. Why is gravity so weak? One possibility is that gravity isn't actually weak, it's diluted. In string theory and other higher dimensional theories, gravity is special. Unlike the other forces, gravity propagates through all dimensions. The electromagnetic force and the nuclear forces are confined to our three-dimensional space. They are stuck on what's called a brane, a three-dimensional surface in higher dimensional space. But gravity leaks out. It spreads into the extra dimensions. So the gravity we feel is just the small fraction that happens to be passing through our three-dimensional slice. Most of it is radiating away into dimensions we can't see. If this is true, then gravity isn't weak. We just can't see most of it. And this leads to a testable prediction. If extra dimensions exist, then at very short distances, gravity should become much stronger. When you are close enough that the extra dimensions matter, when you are probing scales where those dimensions aren't negligible, gravity should change. Physicists have done experiments to test this, looking for deviations from Newton's law of gravity at very short distances. So far, nothing. But the experiments can only probe down to a certain scale. If the extra dimensions are smaller than that, we wouldn't see anything. So again, we are left with hints, with possibilities, with mathematics that suggest something profound about the structure of space, but without definitive proof. It's like being a flatlander who notices that something is strange about one of the forces, who sees an anomaly that might be explained by a third dimension, but who can't quite confirm it. You know something is there, but you can't see it. Now let me take you deeper into one of the strangest discoveries in modern physics. In the 1990s, physicists studying string theory stumbled onto something extraordinary, a correspondence, a duality between two completely different kinds of theories. On one side, you have a theory of gravity in a higher dimensional space. On the other side, you have a quantum theory without gravity in one fewer dimension. And these two theories are exactly equivalent. They describe the same physics. This is called the AD-S-CFT correspondence, and it is one of the most important developments in theoretical physics in the last 50 years. What it tells us is shocking. A theory in 5 dimensions can be perfectly described by a theory in 4 dimensions. The extra dimension doesn't add information. It emerges from the quantum structure of the lower dimensional theory. In other words, dimensions might not be fundamental. They might be emergent, derived from something more basic. And if that's true, then the 3 spatial dimensions you perceive might themselves be emergent. They might arise from quantum information at a more fundamental level. This is the holographic principle. The idea that the physics of a volume of space can be encoded on the boundary of that volume, like a hologram where a 3-dimensional image is encoded on a 2-dimensional surface. Applied to the universe, this means that everything inside a region of space, all the physics, all the information, all the complexity, can be encoded on the surface of that region. The universe might be a hologram. 3-dimensional space might be a projection from a 2-dimensional surface. And you, your thoughts, your experiences, everything you are, might be information encoded on a distant boundary. You think you are 3-dimensional, but you might be a pattern on a 2-dimensional surface that is experiencing the illusion of depth. This sounds insane, I know, but it comes from serious physics, from black hole thermodynamics. In the 1970s, Stephen Hawking and Jacob Bekenstein discovered something strange about black holes. They have entropy, and that entropy is proportional to the surface area of the event horizon, not the volume. This is bizarre. Entropy usually scales with volume. If you have twice as much stuff, you have twice as much entropy. But for black holes, it scales with area. Why? Because it turns out that all the information in a black hole is encoded on its surface. The event horizon is like a hologram containing all the information about everything inside. And if this is true for black holes, it might be true for the universe itself. I have worked on this problem for years, the relationship between information and geometry, between quantum mechanics and space-time. The more I study it, the more I realize that space itself might not be fundamental. Space might emerge from entanglement, from quantum correlations. from information. There is a conjecture I have worked on with Juan Maldacena. It's called ER-EPR. It suggests that quantum entanglement and wormholes are the same thing, that when two particles are entangled, they are connected by a geometric structure in space-time, a wormhole. If this is true, and the evidence is mounting that it is, then space-time is woven from entanglement. The geometry of space emerges from quantum information. And if space is emergent, then dimensions are emergent. They are not fundamental properties of reality. They are patterns that arise from something deeper. You think you live in 3 dimensions because that's what emerges from the quantum structure at the scale you perceive. But at a more fundamental level, there might not be dimensions at all, just information, just quantum correlations. And from those correlations, space-time crystallizes. You are not in space. Space is in you, a structure your mind constructs from more fundamental quantum information. Let me bring this back to something more tangible, something you can almost grasp. When you look at an object, you think you're seeing it, but you're not. You're seeing photons that bounced off it. Your brain reconstructs an image from those photons. The object itself you never directly observe, and the reconstruction your brain creates is 3-dimensional. It has to be. Your brain is wired to interpret visual information as existing in 3 spatial dimensions. But what if the object exists in more than 3 dimensions? What if it has structure in a 4th spatial direction? You would only see the 3-dimensional cross-section, the part that intersects your perceptual space. You would see a shadow, a projection, and you would mistake it for the whole thing. This isn't hypothetical. This is what we do when we look at anything in space-time. We see 3-dimensional slices of 4-dimensional objects. We see moments, not timelines. We see snapshots, not the full structure. Your friend sitting across from you is a 4-dimensional world line stretching from their birth to their death, but you only see one slice, the slice corresponding to this moment. And if there are more dimensions, if there are 5 or 6 or 10, you're seeing even less. You're seeing a tiny fraction of what actually exists. You are perceptually blind to most of reality. Here's what keeps me up at night. Consciousness exists in time. Your thoughts happen sequentially. You remember the past. You anticipate the future. You experience the present moment. But if time is a dimension, if your entire timeline exists in space-time, then where is consciousness? Is consciousness the thing that moves through the timeline, illuminating one moment at a time? Is it a process that exists outside space-time, observing it from somewhere else? Or is consciousness itself 4-dimensional? Is there a version of you at every moment, each experiencing their own present, unaware of the others? In the block universe, there is no objective present. Every moment is equally real. So if you exist at multiple moments, are you one consciousness experiencing them sequentially? Or many consciousnesses each convinced they're the only one? This is the problem of personal identity in a 4-dimensional universe, and nobody knows the answer. If the block universe is real, then right now there is a version of you from 5 years ago and a version of you from 5 years from now, both existing simultaneously in space-time, both experiencing their own present moment, both convinced they're you. Are they all you? Or are you just one slice, one moment in a 4-dimensional structure you call yourself? You might not be a single entity. You might be a multitude, a collection of moments, each one briefly aware, each one thinking it's continuous with the others. But maybe there is no continuity. Maybe each moment is its own thing, its own experience, isolated in time, and the sense of continuity you feel is an illusion, a story your brain tells itself. In a 4-dimensional universe, you might already be dead and also not yet born, both at once, both equally real. Let me tell you about the Planck scale, because this is where reality breaks down completely. At distances smaller than about 1035 meters and time shorter than about 1043 seconds, our theories of physics stop working. Space and time stop being continuous. They become foamy, quantum, undefined. At the Planck scale, dimensions themselves might not make sense. Space might not have a fixed number of dimensions. It might fluctuate. Some regions might be 3-dimensional, others might be 4 or 5 or 2 or something that doesn't even have an integer number of dimensions. This is quantum geometry, and it's one of the biggest unsolved problems in physics. We don't have a theory of quantum gravity. We don't know how space and time behave at the smallest scales. We have hints. We have approaches, string theory, loop quantum gravity, other ideas, but no complete theory. And without that theory, we cannot say for certain what dimensions are, whether they are fundamental or emergent, whether they are exactly 3 or exactly 10 or infinitely many, whether the concept of dimension even applies at the deepest level of reality. We are like flatlanders who have developed mathematics to describe 3 dimensions, who have built elaborate theories about what might exist beyond their plane, but who can never quite confirm it, who can never quite see the truth. And maybe that's our fate. Maybe we are constitutionally unable to perceive the true structure of reality. Maybe our brains, built by evolution to navigate 3-dimensional space, will never grasp what lies beyond. Or maybe we will. Maybe through mathematics, through physics, through pure thought, we can transcend our perceptual limitations. But even if we do, even if we understand higher dimensions intellectually, we will never see them. We will never experience them directly. We will always be trapped in the limited perceptual space our minds construct. I want to go back to something I said earlier about 4-dimensional beings, about what they could see. If a truly 4-dimensional being existed, if they could perceive time as a spatial dimension, they would see your entire life at once. Every moment from birth to death, every decision, every thought, every action. To them, you would be a static structure, a shape in space-time, not moving, not changing, just existing, fully visible, completely exposed. They could see the moment you are born and the moment you die simultaneously. They could see you as a child and as an old person. They could see every version of you that ever existed, and they could interact with any point on your timeline. They could touch you 5 years ago or 5 years from now. Time wouldn't constrain them the way it constrains you. To you, this would seem like time travel, like causality violation, like impossibility. But to them, it would be as natural as you reaching out and touching something to your left. They would see your memories not as abstract information, but as physical structure in your brain at different points in time. They could see the moment a memory forms, the moment it changes, the moment it is forgotten, all at once. Your entire mental life would be visible, not hidden in neurons firing sequentially, but laid out in space-time, observable, knowable. To a 4-dimensional being, you have no secrets, no privacy, no hidden depths. You are completely transparent, and they could be watching you right now. Let me tell you why I believe this matters, why I think about it constantly, why I have devoted my career to understanding the structure of space-time. Because if we are wrong about dimensions, if we are perceiving only a small part of reality, then everything we think we know is incomplete. Science, philosophy, consciousness, existence itself. We pride ourselves on understanding the universe. We have mapped the cosmos, discovered fundamental particles, decoded DNA, built machines that think. But if we are flatlanders, if we are missing entire dimensions of reality, then all of that knowledge is fragmentary. It's like understanding shadows without understanding light, understanding projections without understanding the full shape. And it's not just academic. The structure of dimensions determines the laws of physics, the properties of particles, the behavior of gravity, everything. If we truly understood dimensions, if we could manipulate them or access them, it would change everything. Energy, transportation, computation, communication. But more than that, it would change how we see ourselves. We think of ourselves as complete, as understanding our own existence, as knowing what we are. But if we are 4-dimensional or 10-dimensional objects perceiving only 3 dimensions, then we don't know ourselves at all. We are seeing shadows, fragments, slices. The real you might be something incomprehensibly larger, stretching through dimensions you can't perceive, connected to the rest of reality in ways you will never understand. You might be part of a structure so vast and strange that your entire concept of self is just a limited projection. And here's the most disturbing thought. If consciousness is tied to perception, if what you experience is limited by what you can perceive, then you might be missing most of existence right now. There could be entire civilizations in the 4th dimension, or the 5th, or the 6th, existing parallel to ours, closer than anything in our 3-dimensional space, but completely invisible to us. They could be watching us, studying us, interacting with our reality in ways we interpret as something else entirely. What we call quantum mechanics, with its strange entanglement and non-locality, might just be the shadow of higher dimensional physics. We see particles acting strangely because we are only seeing part of them, the part in our 3 dimensions. The rest exists elsewhere in dimensions we can't access, what we call dark matter and dark energy. The missing mass and energy that make up 95% of the universe might not be missing at all. It might be in extra dimensions right here, but invisible to us because it doesn't interact with the three dimensions we perceive. The universe might be full, teeming with structure and complexity, and we see only the tiny fraction that happens to exist in our limited perceptual space. We are the blind describing an elephant, each touching one part, none of us able to see the whole, except we are even more limited. We are not just blind, we are dimensionally constrained, unable to even conceive of what we are missing. I need to be honest with you about something, about the limits of science. We can mathematically describe higher dimensions, we can work with them in equations, we can predict their effects, but we can never visualize them. We can never imagine them the way we imagine three-dimensional objects. When I think about a fourth spatial dimension, I can't picture it. Nobody can. Our brains don't have the neural architecture to represent it. The best we can do is use analogies, shadows, projections, cross-sections. We can understand it abstractly, symbolically, mathematically, but not intuitively. And this might be the fundamental limit of human knowledge. We can describe reality mathematically beyond what we can perceive or imagine, but we can never truly understand it, not in the deep, intuitive way we understand three-dimensional space. We have reached the edge of human comprehension, and we are trying to go beyond it, armed only with mathematics and logic. It's working, we are making progress, but we are also bumping up against something fundamental, the limits of a brain that evolved to throw spears and gather berries, not to understand 10-dimensional geometry. So when I tell you that you cannot see the fourth dimension, I am not just talking about visual perception. I am talking about conception itself, about the ability of your mind to hold and manipulate ideas. You are neurologically incapable of understanding higher dimensions in the way you understand three-dimensional space. And that's terrifying, because it means there are truths about reality that you can approach mathematically but never grasp intuitively. There are aspects of existence forever beyond your comprehension, not because you are not smart enough, but because you are human. Let me leave you with this. Perhaps the strangest discovery in modern physics is not that higher dimensions exist. It is that they may already be here, woven into every point of space, closer to you than your own thoughts. While you remain trapped inside the small fragment of reality your mind is capable of seeing, you pass through extra dimensions with every movement. You exist in them right now, but you will never perceive them, never access them directly, never know what you are missing. The universe is vastly larger than what you see, not larger in the sense of containing more space, larger in the sense of containing more dimensions, more degrees of freedom, more ways to exist, and you are confined to three. A prisoner in a cell without walls, because the walls aren't physical. They are neurological, perceptual, built into the structure of your consciousness. To a four-dimensional being, you are as limited as a flatlander, as unable to perceive reality as a drawing on a page. You live in space-time but experience only space. You exist in 10 dimensions but perceive only 3. You are inside a dimensional cage, and the bars are made of the limits of your own mind. This isn't speculation. This isn't philosophy. This is what the mathematics tells us, what the physics demands, what decades of theoretical work has revealed. Reality is not what you think it is. It is vastly stranger, deeper, more complex, and most of it is invisible to you, not hidden far away, but right here, surrounding you, passing through you, existing in dimensions your brain cannot process. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that this might be intentional, not designed, but inevitable. Perhaps consciousness itself can only exist in limited dimensions. Perhaps perceiving higher dimensions would overwhelm any possible mind. Perhaps we are three-dimensional not by accident but by necessity, or perhaps not. Perhaps somewhere in the universe there are beings that see more, that perceive 4 or 5 or 6 spatial dimensions, that look at us the way we might look at drawings, and to them we are primitives, trapped in our limited space, convinced that what we see is all there is. I don't know which possibility disturbs me more, but I do know this. The universe doesn't care what you can perceive. It exists in all its dimensions, in all its complexity, whether you can see it or not. And you, right now, are a 10-dimensional structure existing across space and time and hidden curled-up dimensions. Your world line stretches from the Big Bang to the heat death of the universe. Your particles exist in geometries you cannot fathom. But you experience only this moment, this three-dimensional slice, this narrow window of perception. You are so much more than you know, and yet you will never see it. That is the tragedy of being human in a 10-dimensional universe.